this time, our agenda is action-packed today, and we're short on time. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, David Lincoln, who is an environmental consultant and geologist with a master's in Geo-information Science and extensive experience with energy industries, focused on health and environmental impacts, and he's here as a Sierra Club volunteer. I'll turn the microphone over to you.
When I saw the topic of this conference, I got very excited because, as you know, the topic is revealing new information. And I thought, just for a change, I'd try and bring up all the new information that I could put together in one place. And see if we can go from there. Here we go. I've called this talk, What Do You Do Next? Or a Survival Toolkit for Mayflower Residents. I've tried to be patient and wait for the authorities to reveal some of the information that they have been sitting on and try and allow things to take their course. But I found that after 6 months, there is still so much lack of data and so much lack of cooperation to get any serious analysis going that you pretty much have to do the work yourself. So, there we go. So I'm going to talk about some specific tools that you can use. And you can think of this as getting ready for battle with Exxon. Because if you've been poisoned, you're going to have to fight the people who have poisoned you. And you need two things. You need armor and you need weapons. And I'm going to give you a little bit of both. And if you haven't been told already, your first tool is an actual exposure log. Where were you at the time of the spill? What is the distance from your house both to the break and to the closest oil? Now, why does that matter? Because there is a discrepancy between the symptoms that people are describing and the problems that the analysis of the air samples gives us. And there are lots of reasons for that, but let me just give you the simplest answer. Most people know that the VOCs and the VTEXs, which I'll talk about in a moment, peak in the first hour. So we can say that people were exposed to gases that were never measured because they decreased so rapidly that they never saw the peak levels. The second thing that I can tell you, that everybody seems to already know, is that hydrogen sulfide is heavier than air. Therefore, if you measure it at about this level, which is pretty much the standard level, you will get a certain level of H2S. However, if you try and measure it down around your knees, you might get twice as much. You might get several times as much. And therefore, if you are standing next to a fence where the monitors are, they give a fairly good representation for the hydrogen sulfide that you were exposed to. However, if you were sleeping in a bed or in a house or sitting in a chair next to the spill when it happened, you got a lot more H2S than is measured by those monitors. So that's just one of the reasons. Now, I said I would tell you about some tools. It's not enough just to know how far away you are from the original break and from the original spill. You need to know how to do it. So if you go to Google Earth, you can actually bring up a measuring tool, and you can put it on your house and drag it to the break point, and you can see that it actually measures in yards or miles or feet or whatever you want to set it at. And then you can put it where you think the oil spread, the closest to your house, and you can measure that. That's one for your toolkit. The next thing you need is a daily log, something probably nobody has talked to you about. They need to know how much time have you actually spent in that neighborhood day by day. Where were you from hour to hour? What do you remember about the odors? What are your photos showing? If you have photos in the area and you took photos of the oil, then most likely you were exposed to the oil in those photos. Has anybody seen this picture? Take a close look at it. This is not the 2-year-old Exxon one that is used for the analysis of the spill response. This is not the Google Earth photo from last year. This is the July 31st, 2013 satellite image of your neighborhood. It's not too hard, I hope, to see that there has been considerable damage and that the restoration effects can be seen. In fact, if you strain your eyes and even look at the roads between the houses, you will see that you can actually delineate the repaving parts. So you can start to begin to see how much oil and where the oil actually went. When I said that this is revealing new information, I got this image yesterday, and I didn't get the analysis until about an hour before the show. So you are the first group to actually see a satellite image of your neighborhood. This is the familiar Exxon map. I pointed out last time that if you look carefully, you'll see that in the corner where the pipeline broke, there are no houses. So that dates it about 3 years old, and that's what Exxon was using. And that's the area they want you to believe was impacted by the movement of oil. And you've already heard about the response. They were there as quickly as they could get there, and the oil was already flowing, so they decided to push it into the sewers. Now, this is your standard emergency response guidelines from 2012 for crude oil and also for tar liquids. And what I have emphasized here is that the standard non-fire response for an oil spill is prevent entry into waterways, sewers, basements, or confined areas. Do not accelerate it, which is, of course, what they chose to do. Just in case you had trouble actually seeing how much damage has been done to your neighborhood, I did some processing of the image yesterday and came up with something like this. Now, if you look carefully, you'll notice that the houses are different colors. That's kind of got us mystified. We don't know if that's a temperature effect or if it's a sun angle effect or if it's a hydrocarbon effect. But it's very interesting that two houses adjacent to each other are two different colors. And the colors seem to correspond to the same dirty overall view of the contamination that we see in the area. We'll be doing a lot more of these. We'll also be doing some before and after comparisons, which will go up on the Sierra Club website. I also want to give credit to Apollo Mapping, who provided this image turnaround in record time, and also SkyTruth, John Amos at SkyTruth, who helped us a little with the processing. So let's talk about the response a little bit more. What happens in Canada when there's a big oil spill? Well, it seems that the Canadians believe that Canadian response should set an isolation zone in a big circle. And then they believe that there should be a cone drawn to that circle in a downwind direction. And for oil and gas, they estimate that the daylight large spill distance should be 300 feet in all directions, and in the direction downwind, 0.2 miles and 0.3 miles. So that's what would have been isolated. Whether you want to call that an evacuation, I don't know, but that's what would have been isolated if you had had this kind of spill in your backyard in Canada. So the wetlands damage is fairly extensive, and it's not something that anybody has really talked much about, except Dr. Mason. He said that it would never recover. And I think that's a fair assessment, since we know of wetlands that have been damaged by oil spills that have not recovered even after 30 years. And in this image, you can clearly see the level of vegetation that was moved, and hopefully you can see the colors. And you can also see some of the different colors where the oil is backed up. Now remember, this is how far the oil had migrated in July 31. So we are now into nearly October, and I assure you that those booms are not trapping oil at any efficient level. We also know that this particular bitumen is heavier than water, or at least becomes heavier than water as the volatiles evaporate. And therefore, we can say with some degree of certainty that the oil is sinking in this area. So let's talk about what spilled. You all heard about the Wabasca heavy crude, fancy name, the tar sands, the diluted bitumen, the dilbit. All of that is diversion, okay? What really happened is there was a deposit of asphalt and tar, and in order to make it move through a pipe, they had to add gasoline, natural gasoline, or naphtha to it. So the big question, the one that nobody wants to answer, the one that no one will even come close to, is how much of it was diluted. If you read the Wabasca Heavy Crude Material Safety Data Sheet, it nails it down. It says conclusively somewhere between 10 and 50% is diluted gasoline. Now, when it comes to its composition, we know that it's diluted. They won't tell us what, and they won't tell us how much. So it's kind of like going to the pharmacy and being poisoned, and then have the pharmacist tell you, I'm sorry, I can't tell you what I made a mistake with. It's proprietary. It's a trade secret. You're not allowed to know. Well, if you've been poisoned and you don't know the composition of what you've been poisoned with, that's a crime. Somebody needs to be arrested. Somebody needs to answer the question. How can you have 200, 300, 400, 500,000 gallons of this stuff and not know how much of it's gasoline and how much of it is asphalt? So if you are interested in the rules for the diluent, the natural gasoline, sure enough, the Environmental Response Guide also says prevent entry into the waterways, sewers, basements, confined area, and the vapor suppressing foam may be used to suppress the vapors. Now, I know that those people tried to do a great job in responding to the accident or the catastrophe, however you want to refer to it. But the real question is, did they even know what the heck they were looking at? Did they know that this stuff evaporates in the first couple of hours? Did they know that the concentration of the diluent and the tar is constantly changing as soon as it hits the air? Did they know about the composition? You've heard that it contains benzene, right? Well, the official term is BTEX. I don't know if you've ever heard of BTEX. BTEX is an abbreviation for that nasty stuff: benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene. All you have to know is BTEX. You can look it up on the web. And the beauty about BTEX is that it's all volatile and it's all poisonous. So if you're breathing it, you're being damaged. So you might think, some people might be interested in how much BTEX is in this substance. And once again, the Exxon Materials Safety Data Sheet tells us conclusively that for benzene, the concentration ranges from 1 to 5%. So does the concentration of toluene. So does the concentration of ethylbenzene. So does the concentration of xylene. So the concentration of BTEX ranges from a mere 4% to a mere 20%. And if you want to know what's in this stuff, all you have to do is publish in the newspaper that you think that it's got 20% BTEX in it, and I guarantee you that Exxon will provide some actual data instead of more guesses about, well, maybe it's dilbit or maybe it's Wabasca heavy crude. Don't be intimidated by these people. They are not your friend. They not only poisoned you, they poisoned your children. And you need to be prepared to go after them. This business of how much oil is spilled, you know, the press has pretty well come up with 210,000 barrels or 212,000 barrels or whatever the number is. But we already know from the press reports and from the Great Unified Command that in the first day they recovered 12,000 barrels of something. Okay? Ask yourself, with all this asphalt, how much water do you think they recovered in the first day? Right? 24 hours they were sucking this stuff. Don't you think they were getting the oil before they got the water? 500,000 gallons in the first day. And how long did those trucks go? How many times did they send those trucks over to the dump sites where they just basically pushed it onto their own property and said, well, we're done with it? By now, they've probably separated the oil from the water, sold the oil, taken the water and re-injected it like their frac fluids. Find out how much they spill. Does it matter? Well, what is 1% of 210,000 gallons? Okay? That's the minimum amount of benzene that dumped in your neighborhood. Did Exxon forget to tell you that? Oh yeah, they said, it's probably safe for the general population. That's 2,000 gallons of benzene. And that's the minimum amount. 2,000 gallons. How much of that evaporated in the first hour? No wonder people are sick. No wonder they're going to be sicker. After 6 months, I look out at the residence and I see more and more sick people. And you're told, well, if you feel like you're sick, go to your doctor. Well, what if you don't feel sick for another 6 months? Okay? Look at the Alaskan spill. Look at the BP spill. These people continue to get sick. Some of them were acutely ill at the first. Some of them developed sensitivities over time. And some of them just developed chronic diseases as the result of what? BTEX exposure. What else? PAHs. Do PAHs show up in the air? Not in high quantities. The PAHs show up in the water and the soil. So let's talk about the cooperation. Let's talk about information is power. How long has it been since you've seen an actual aerial photo from Exxon? Anybody seen one? How about from the EPA? You think the EPA took some of their executives up in a helicopter and maybe filmed the actual oil moving down the street so we could calculate the viscosity and the amount and how much of it was pushed into the sewers, which went into the wetlands? I don't think so. Did the ADEQ report how much oil they measured? Did they report the analysis? Who are they keeping this stuff secret from? Exxon? Exxon already knows. The EPA already knows. The Attorney General already knows. The only people left to keep this stuff secret from are the residents of Mayflower. And I, for one, am tired of hearing them say, we can't provide that information. The Attorney General has 12,000 pages of information he got from Exxon. It's been 6 months and we still don't have the inventory of what Exxon turned over. Who is he keeping it secret from? And if it's a confidentiality agreement, ask yourself, does Exxon pay any attention to confidentiality agreements? Do they hesitate to close the airspace and prevent people from flying over? Do they hesitate to order the Unified Command to release a statement which says, we think the air is safe for you to breathe, you can go home? The problem is, you don't have to be nice to these people. They are not nice. Here's another map you probably haven't seen, but probably should have. This comes from Zillow. Everybody know Zillow? You can go to Zillow anywhere in the United States and see what all the houses are that are up for sale. I did this week. You want to know which houses are impacted by this spill? Take a look at the number of houses for sale. Look at the prices. Doesn't have to examine very closely to realize that the prices are going down. Also notice that not every one of these houses that Exxon is buying are for sale. That's because they've already been guaranteed the sale. They don't have to post the price. So what happens with other spills? This is a study I did in Massachusetts where a tiny little restaurant was subjected to a tanker spill, truck that rolled over and spilled all of 7,000 gallons. 7,000 measly gallons. The first thing that we needed to know is we needed to know the maximum toxic exposure. Sort of like what the Mayflower residents need to know. The maximum toxic exposure. This one is benzene at 1%. You can see that the cloud goes out to about 2 miles. That the less significant clouds are in the hundreds of feet. It's not enough to know what the maximum exposure is. You need to know which way the wind was blowing. You need to know how that cloud dispersed. You need to know how far from the source it went. When are these models going to be released? These are EPA models. These are NOAA models. These are ADEQ models. When are they going to tell you what you have been exposed to? In this case, you can see the threat zones. You can see the direction. You can see the distance. What other tools do you need? A health log. You've already been told you need to have a community health assessment. But again, a community health assessment is not gather up all the sick people and ask them what their symptoms are. A community health assessment is door to door, where you ask each person to document their health issues for the past 6 months. It's assuming that they have been poisoned, and it's looking for evidence and data. They need to know the doctor's visits. We need to know their worst symptoms, their current symptoms, their medications prescribed for the symptoms. Let's talk a little bit about chemical spill response. I told you that these models are readily available. The package for chemical spill response is called Cameo. It's developed by Hazmat. You can get it on the internet, and it consists of reference materials for every crude oil, including oil tar, including heavy crude. Calculate the hydrogen sulfide threat zone. You've got to know. Model the benzene. Model the naphthalene. If they won't give you the data, get somebody to model it for you. Look at the maximum you were exposed to. You need to know the distance and the time and the concentration. This is the kind of data that real scientists look at, yet you haven't been shown anything, nothing that you can use. You don't even know what you've been poisoned with. You don't know how far the oil has reached. You don't know what you have been, you don't understand the risk that you've taken. And the companies and the agencies have done little or nothing to make this easier for you. Like I said, if they won't tell you, use the limits, 1%, 5%. Put it out there. Look at it. When you go against Exxon, have it in your hand. They're going to ask you, where were you on the time of that spill? Where were you in the first week? When did you get out of the neighborhood? How much did you inhale? Did you have any unusual experiences, or did you get out of the neighborhood? The other model that's part of Cameo is called Aloha. It's a fancy name for aerial hazardous atmospheres. Do you think that might be a useful tool to have? The people that you're asking questions from know this stuff. They have these models. They just haven't shown them to you. As students, you can download this for free. You can create these in your spare time. You can release them to the media, and you will have the only data out there. Because what happens in the first hour with benzene is critical. And what happens to the evaporation of the tar over the first week is critical. But nobody wants to tell you the information. Marplot is just a tack-on that allows you to put it onto a simple map. And then these threat zones, these yellows and reds, those are called Emergency Response Planning Guidelines. And here's an example. Acute exposure guideline levels. Life-threatening health effects, long-lasting adverse health effects, could experience notable discomfort, irritation, or certain asymptomatic non-sensory effects. However, the effects are not disabling and are transient and reversible, we hope. Wouldn't it be useful to actually have some of this data? Doesn't the EPA have people who can actually show you something real instead of going to a microphone and telling you you're all going to be fine? This is another model called Adios, another free download. It looks at percentage evaporation in the first 5 days. Look at this. Son of a gun, Wabasca heavy crude. In the first day, it goes from 100% down to 80%, and then what happens? It just sits there for 5 days. Why 5? Because that's as long as the model's designed for. It never goes away. All right, there's been a lot said about the samples, the water samples and the soil samples. What I've been telling people from day one is the values don't matter unless you have something significant to compare it to. These are called squirts. They're created by NOAA, thankfully, and they stand for Screening Quick Reference Tables. And curiously, not only do we have the analysis for freshwater sediments and water, we also have them for all those long lists of chemicals that people say they don't know anything about. And what did NOAA do? NOAA looked at all of the different sediment contamination levels in the country, and then they combined them with sedimentation contamination levels in Canada, put all of that together, and determined what the lowest exposure levels would be, where they actually see some changes in microorganisms. And from that, they could say, well, there may be a safe level as long as there's no evidence that organisms were altered below that level. So these are the metals. They're not very interesting. Groundwater, arsenic, some of the things that people have checked for. I know you can't see this stuff. Let's see if I can blow it up a little bit. Can someone show me how to expand this? Oops.
Oh.
That's not what I want. That's the easy one. Okay, we'll give it a try. I know this is a lot of technical stuff, people, but since there's been no data in 6 months, I thought it might be nice for a change. No, that didn't work. Anyway, the point I want to make here is that every single PAH and VOC is listed with an actual groundwater, surface water, and sediment level that is considered safe. And these are all in parts per billion, and some of them are extremely small, like 0.5 parts per billion, which is 500 trillion, parts per trillion. And the same is true for the PAHs. Curiously, with the PAHs, we know about benzopyrene because there's a lot of studies on it. We know that the other PAHs are also toxic. We don't know how much, and we don't have enough studies. So, surprisingly, there is no actual level that is considered a contaminant, acceptable contaminant level. So, one of the things you have to be aware of when people tell you that the soils are safe is a lot of the things that are in those soils don't have agreed upon contaminant levels because there's just not enough data. So keep in mind, like I said, that some of these are in parts per trillion, not parts per billion. And certainly when you get into the water column, it's something that you want to be extremely concerned about. So, are there any questions? Yes?
I have not heard of pretty much any of these. Have these models, some of them, already been produced by the EPA or the state, or I'm imagining that probably Exxon has, but is any of this stuff already been produced so that we wouldn't be having to try to put it together now? And how do we go about getting it if they are?
These are models that were developed by the government, okay? They use them in other areas.
But
They
what I'm
use them
saying
for
is,
other
has the
response.
Has the data already been filled in for this disaster that happened here in the spring?
Does anybody know what the composition of the poison is? I'm an environmental consultant. I do these models for a living, okay? I can do these. You can work through the guidebook and do them yourself. But the point is that you better not go up against Exxon without at least knowing what you've been exposed to, because they're going to tell you your yard wasn't covered in oil, therefore you're healthy.
So as far as you know, you don't think the state or anyone other than Exxon probably has this data filled into these models?
I don't know why not. They have information for Wabasca heavy crude, so they know what the evaporation rate is. They have the video. They know how fast it moved. They know how much they sampled. Presumably they've got a jar of it somewhere, so they know how much is diluent and how much of it is oil. Don't ask me. I'm not the one who went down there to pretend to sample the oil. You know, I stayed away. I've been to too many oil spills. You don't stand there and look at them. It's not healthy. And when they tell you that the level of benzene is probably safe because we know the gasoline stations have the same level of benzene, keep in mind you don't sleep in gas stations. Okay? You are not exposed to those levels 24 hours a day. Everybody in this neighborhood is exposed 24 hours a day. And I will reiterate that in the first hour, you were exposed to unknown toxins. And they won't even tell you what the original material is, much less what it looked like an hour later. You've got to get the tools. You've got to prepare. Exxon believes that knowledge is power. They have all the power because they've released none of useful knowledge. Nothing. They can go out and take a sample and know what it's going to be before they take it because they've been to dozens of these things. They know exactly what to look for. They don't have to analyze 1,000 different chemicals that are found in oil. They know, look for PAHs, look for B-texes, look for the things that are toxic that we know what the levels are. Have you seen a comparison between the exposure in Mayflower and the exposure from BP? No. That would be data. You have not seen any data. And the air samples that were taken, which way was the wind blowing? Okay? The question that you have to ask yourself is, what is the altitude? What is the time since the spill? And most importantly, how far are they from the oil? Not from the break, but from the oil. And as you've seen with these new satellite images, the oil is everywhere. Okay? It's spread out into the wetlands exactly the way Exxon knew it would. And everything that it touched is dead. Okay? That thing, that estuary is not going to come back. And those 1,000 animals that you heard were dead, when the animals come back, they will die again. Okay? It's dead. And the ecology of that area is dead. And nobody wants you to know that. And that's one of the reasons it's so difficult to get real data. Because they poisoned your neighborhood. They poisoned your houses. They poisoned your furniture. And it's time for you to fight back. Because until you have data in your hands, you're just sheep. They will devour you. Any other questions? Yes?
For the state question, most of you know, I see most of the people lecture residents. So when it comes down to it, I'm a stickler for right to self-defense. I've always done that next time. But I've done even before that. I was in your community Easter Sunday morning at 5:30 a.m. I spent the whole day there. I was the only one with a gas mask. By Wednesday, I counted 52 frac tanks full think about this. Any of those tankers that run around hold 10,000 gallons, but by law, they can only put 80% in. So they typically run they stay under because they don't want to get fines on the road. 7 to 7,500 gallons are in them tanks. If they truly only spill 210,000 gallons, then you would have seen less than 30 of those trucks. Did you see less than 30 of those trucks? Yeah. There was 10 just on Easter Sunday. I counted 10 leaving the Northwood subdivision before noon that were full. That's 75,000 gallons just by noon on Sunday, 2 days later.
So you don't think much of that was water, you think it was dilbit?
That was on that side of the railroad tracks. That was oil. It was almost, well, I'm 6 foot tall. It was this deep in the railroad tracks. That's like 5 feet deep. A little bit, but not much. And the other thing with people that live, you guys that live behind it, the storm was coming in, going north. Well, guess which way the wind's blowing down here? Going south to you. The storms feed each other. So all that stuff, all that oil that was in the subdivision and at the railroad tracks, the fumes were headed to you, not to the cove. For most of the day, Easter Sunday. So when it comes time for your lawsuits and all that stuff, I got all that written down.
So ask yourself, when the next person comes through to say that you've probably, you've imagined it, or your experience is not consistent with the data, you ask them, how much BTEX was I exposed to? And if they don't have an answer for you, they don't know. And it's BTEX that's going to determine your future health for some time. And then the PAHs take over. Anything else?
You're saying the health department survey that asks if you've been exposed to chemicals is not a good question?
No. No, you've got to know where you were, when you were, and what happened every day since the spill. And that will begin to give you a risk assessment.
What are PAH?
PAH is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. Okay? These are the things that are in all oils and gasolines, by the way. And the PAHs are long-lived. And they're also fat soluble, so they tend to concentrate in both the human body and in soils. So
They don't evaporate.
some evaporate a little bit, most of them just get concentrated. Like I said, there are some spills that have happened 30 years ago, and they still go out, dig a hole, and the PAHs are still there. Yes? Sure. That's a great story. You know? Wait till you read the scientific studies on the people who lay down the asphalt on your highways. They have higher cancer rates. PAHs, okay? Yeah. Yep. This is not the oil company's first oil spill. They know before they send their first person out. That's why they send their PR and their lawyers and their people out there to basically assure people that it's not as bad as it looks. Yeah. Unfortunately, here's the real tragedy. Some of the people that they send out really haven't been told. You know, they could go out there and scoop it up and sniff it and say it's okay, and they get sick the next day too, you know?
But they won't say they're sick.
Yes, go ahead.
Just in relation
10,000 cleanup workers after the Exxon Valdez. They tried to do a follow-up study on the cleanup workers, and there weren't enough of them alive to do it. Okay? Now, maybe they all died of car accidents, I don't know. But those are not good odds. Yes? These volatile substances evaporate very rapidly, but if you bury them in dirt, okay, then you go back and uncover them, they evaporate again.
That's all they've been doing up there, digging.
And that's what the satellite photograph shows. It shows an ecology that has been completely disrupted, and it's not coming back. And if the EPA is doing their job, they will fine those people for destruction of wetlands, deliberate with destruction of wetlands, because I can't see that anybody spent any effort trying to contain the oil and keep it out of the wetlands. And that's against the law. Yes, way back.
Oh, I already forgot the question. I was just so listening, I just started listening. Maybe I can. Because I live in the cove, that's part.
You live in the cove, right. Remember, the image I showed you was July 31st, and you can pretty much see where the oil had gotten at that point, and
You're still there?
at least on the surface. The rest of it's sunk.
Well, that's their question. Because I have been home this whole time, and I'm living in the town, and I have been sick. So every time those airboats go out there,
Yes?
I throw up. I mean, I throw up every day. I
Uh-huh.
got down to 87 pounds. I'm back up to 91. Woohoo, cookies! And then it's bad. It stinks. Is it true? Is it just in my head, or when they do that, does it stir it up and release it?
Well, ask yourself, when was the last time you saw somebody finish a road paving job and dump the excess into the sewers? Or when was the last time that somebody who was roofing your house took the rest of the asphalt and dumped it into the wetlands? Okay? There are laws against that stuff. And the reason is because it's dangerous.
That's why trash people will pick up tires.
Yeah.
And dispose of it yourself.
Yeah.
They won't put it in the landfill.
That's a whole other story, right? Thank you very much, people.
Thank you.